All right, so my name is Michael Hacker, and I'm an Azure App Dev Technical Specialist. I cover Microsoft State and Local Government. My email address is listed there. So throughout this, we've got about 25 minutes or so left to go through this demonstration, this presentation. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat window, and I'll try to answer them as quick as I can. If I can't get to all of the questions, feel free to email me, and I will make sure that you get redirected to the appropriate Microsoft resource that can answer the questions that you have. So today we're going to be talking about Azure API Management. And really, I wanted to first start off with just a single slide. And this is the only slide that I have from Azure API Management. But I just wanted to cover really quick what exactly is API Management and what is it that we're going to be talking about. So to start off, Azure API Management really is a tool to help you organize and publish your APIs. And these APIs can be published internally to your developers. They might be published externally or to partners. It's really up to you who has access to these. But the idea is we want to organize, we want to secure, we want to protect, and we want to be able to deliver a great API solution to our developers. And so API management is built on three key capabilities. One is the API gateway. The second one's the developer portal. And the final one is the Azure portal. And we'll look at those items as we go through the presentation today. So when we talk about the API gateway, this is really the heart of the API management system. The API gateway provides an endpoint for your developers to connect to, so their apps to connect to be able to access the different APIs that you're publishing. And then the API gateway routes those requests to the appropriate back-end APIs that you have built yourself, or maybe a partner has built, or it's part of an existing application. So that's what the API gateway does at its heart, is to route incoming requests to the appropriate endpoints. Now, this is really nice because that means that, one, developers have a single basic domain that they're always going to be connecting to, and it gives you that gateway or that single point of entry to get to all of your different APIs, and your developers don't necessarily have to know exactly how to connect to each individual item, kind of behind the scenes. The API gateway also provides a level of security that you can implement. It also provides this concept of subscriptions, where you have a subscription key as a developer, and that allows your applications that you build to securely connect to specific APIs inside of the API management system. We can also do transformations, and this can be important if you have maybe an older API, but you want it to look like a newer API type. So maybe you've got an older SOAP-based API, but you want to expose it as a REST-based API. Well, what we can do is the gateway can actually help with those types of transformations. So it can help you transform the data that's coming in, maybe from JSON to XML or XML to JSON, or other types of transformations that can really make it easier to have more modern applications, maybe talk to some legacy type systems. It provides caching. So one of the challenges that we can have when we're dealing with APIs is that if we end up with too much or too many connections coming into a specific API, your backend system might get overloaded. So we can implement caching at the API gateway level. So if there's certain data or items that come out of your API that are more consistent, like lookup data, et cetera, we can actually cache that at the API gateway layer. And that helps reduce the amount of traffic that we're dealing with. Of course, the API gateway also logs all the transactions. So everything that's occurring through the API gateway is logged. So we can easily tell how things are actually working. We'll actually see this here live in just a few minutes, but we're able to see exactly who's calling our APIs, how frequently are they being called, how performant are our APIs, are they responding quickly, are they being called too many times, what's the health of the API gateway in itself, and what it is, and how is it doing at the performance tier that it's configured at. And then finally, enforcing quota and rate limits. Now, a lot of people think of that as one of the primary benefits of API management. This is basically gives you the option to enforce quotas or rate limits to your backend APIs. So now when a developer has built an application, if the application is behaving poorly or the developer is making too many API calls, your gateway can actually throttle that and return back responses that allow the application to know that it's making too many calls to the API, and it protects your back end from having those calls go all the way through. So it's a little bit, maybe you could kind of think of it a little bit like a denial of service protection, but really it gives you the ability to rate limit how fast we get those calls to the back end. The nice thing about that is we can actually define something that we call products, and that allows us to define a series of APIs that we bundle together. We call it a product, and then that product itself can have specific rate limits. So in the demo that we're going to do in a moment, there's a starter product, and the starter product actually has rate limits set to it. So that would be something that we might give a developer when they're first initially building an application, and they get a key that allows them to have the starter package so they can make a few calls to the back end to test it out, but they're not making a lot of calls. And then when it goes to production, maybe we switch them over and give them the key to be able to use the unlimited product, which then removes all those rate limits. But that can be configured in pretty much any way that you'd like. So the next piece, the developer portal. So once we have all of our APIs out there and we've got them defined, and we've got our security in place and our quota and rate limits defined, we want to make sure that our developers can easily see what APIs are available for them for building their applications. We want to encourage reuse. We want to encourage doing things a standard way. And so the developer portal is that API catalog that the developers will look at. It'll show all the different APIs that are available, all the different products that are available. So that'll tell them about rate limits, etc. It's going to have documentation for each individual API. So you'll be able to see exactly how to interact with that API. Does it require a GET call? Does it require a PUT request? Does it require a patch request? So what kind of request is required, and how do I interact with that? It even goes so far as to show you source code for calling that API, and we have multiple languages that are shown there. So you can pretty much just copy and paste that specific code and drop it in your application so that you can easily get started. So it makes it very, very simple to start consuming those APIs. The developer portal also allows the developer themselves to put in a request for a subscription key. So subscription keys are required in order to access APIs that are put out by the gateway, and those subscription keys help us enforce any quota or rate limits that are there. So the developer can request through the portal a subscription key, and depending on how you have it configured, there might be an approval process so that then they can get approved to get a subscription key for a specific product or specific tier. And so it gives them a really nice experience for being able to identify APIs and to work with them. And then finally is the interactive piece. In the developer portal, there's the ability to quickly try out an API without even writing any code. And then finally, we have the developer or the actual Azure portal. The Azure portal is where you're going to go to define your APIs, package those into products, set those specific policies, so the quota limits, etc., to get insights. So being able to review the data that was collected by the API gateway logging, to see exactly what's how frequently your API is being used. Is it being used or not? Should we continue to support it, or should we look for other options, maybe to retire it? It also will give you information about individual subscription keys and how frequently they're hitting and using your APIs. And then, of course, managing the users that are out there. So let's go and jump in and actually see what this looks like. So let me switch over to my second screen. And it's probably going to take just a moment for this to come up. So I'll go ahead and wait just a second. If somebody wants to just put a quick message in chat, as long as you can see my screen there, just to let me know. Hopefully it came up for everybody. Can you guys see the screen? Yep. Okay, great. Thanks, Sean. So this is the Azure Government Portal. We're going to go through this kind of quick because we only have about 15 minutes, but When we want to get started with Azure API Management, you need a Azure subscription. So here I have an Azure Government subscription. You could use a Azure Commercial subscription. Let me zoom this in just a little bit here. If I go up here to create resource, we just say we want to create a resource. In the search the marketplace piece, we put in API Management. And right at the top is our API Management feature. So we go ahead and choose that. And you're going to get a little panel here that will tell you a little bit about API Management and quick links. So if you need to get documentation, things like that, when you search for something in the Azure Marketplace, you're going to get links to documentation and videos. What we're going to do is hit create and fill in just a little bit of information in the form. So we have to give it a name. We're going to choose which subscription we're going to put it in inside of Azure. We're going to choose our resource group, which we want to put it in. I would recommend creating a new resource group for your API management environment. Choose which data center region you would like it to be located in. And then just a couple of additional pieces of contact information so that the API management can reach out to an individual for notifications. And finally, the pricing tier. Now, I would recommend if you're just getting started, click on the developer pricing tier. It does not have an SLA, but it's going to be the lowest cost and give you the full features of the API management environment. If you're going to be deploying in production, you're going to want to choose either basic, standard, or premium. And if you click on this link here, view full pricing details, it will expand out another window that will show you step by step exactly what's included and what the price is for each of those tiers. So what we're going to do is go ahead and do that, hit create, and then that will start creating your API management environment. Now, it'll take about 5 to 10 minutes for that to complete. So I have already created one that I will go out to right here. So I've got a resource group called API Management or MGMT Demo. And inside of there is my API Management Service located in the US government region in Texas. So if I click on this, it's going to look just like any other service that we have inside of Azure. We're going to start with an overview screen here, and the overview screen is going to give us a view of what's going on in our API management. First of all, we're going to see a status to see that it's online and there's no issues. You'll see that we're in the Texas region. Over here is our developer portal URL. So this is the link that we would give our developers if they wanted to go and see what different APIs are available and how to go and register for those APIs. And then we have the gateway URL. This is going to be the domain that the applications themselves are going to connect to reach your APIs. Below, we see some information about performance. So we've got capacity, we've got request, and we've got latency. So right here, we can quickly see how our API management system overall is performing. Are we exceeding the capacity for the service tier that we've selected? If so, we might need to scale up our service tier. How many requests are coming in for our specific APIs? And if I scroll down, what's the latency? You know, it's really important that your APIs are responding quickly. And if they're not, you want to know about it so that you can fix those situations so that your end customers, the people that are actually using these APIs, are not having a bad experience. So it gives us some really good capabilities there. So normally to get started, you would jump down here into this left menu here, and this is very similar to any other of the Azure services. In fact, this top section here is identical to all the other Azure services. You're going to have the overview pane, the activity log for Azure, role-based access control, so you can choose who has access to this portal and what can they do, and some additional things here that we can set. Where we really get started with API management is down here a little bit further under the API management section, under the security section, and also under the settings section. So these are the three sections that are going to define how your API management environment works. And we're going to focus on the ones up here at the top initially here. So let me click on APIs. This is where we define our APIs that we want to make available to our developers. So when we come out here, there's this Echo API that's created by default. It's just a demo to show you how this works. But what we want to do is add our own APIs. So over here in the right, you can see that we have a bunch of tiles that show us the different types of APIs that we can easily import into API management. We can start with a blank API where we're going to define everything manually. Or if we've got an open API specification API, we could choose this and import it. Or if we've got more of a legacy type, we could do a Waddle or WSDL. Maybe we've created logic apps, API apps, or function apps inside of Azure. We can easily connect to them and front end them with API management with just a couple of clicks. Okay, so it's quite simple to do. What I'm going to do is I want to show you how to actually bring in a new API into this using the Open API specifications. So I'm going to click on Open API specifications, and I'm going to drop in the link to my API. Now, it also has, it used to be called Swagger, is the definition. This API automatically puts out the Swagger definition. So you see, as soon as I put that in there, it automatically pulled out the display name and a name for the API that will be used internally. And then we can put in a suffix. This is going to be kind of the next level down in our URL when we're calling our API. Since we have one endpoint for our API management environment, we need to have basically a path. So I'm just going to call this conference. And then down here is where we choose our products. Now, I mentioned earlier we can define products that have specific performance tiers. We've got an unlimited one here that was defined and a starter one. Since we're going to do this for a demo, we'll just go ahead and choose unlimited. We could actually choose multiple if we want, and then that would allow the developers to request a key for one or the other. In this case, we're just going to have unlimited. So I hit create. Now it takes just a moment for it to reach out to that API and pull in all the operations that are available. So let me zoom back out just a tiny bit here so I can get all of this to show on the screen a little bit better. And I apologize for the size, but we got a lot on the screen here. So here lists all the APIs that we've imported. So we've got our demo conference API that we imported. The next tab over shows our operations. So here are all the different operations. We've got our get operations. We've got a post operation down here. We might have other operations such as patch, etc. So let's go ahead and look at one of these. We'll click on the Get Sessions API. And when I click on that, notice how this section to the right fills out. So first we have the front end. So this is going to be our endpoint. And we're going to see that this API has 3 query parameters that we can pass to it, and that we would expect to get a 200 OK response from this specific API. Now there's a path that you're going to see here. We go from the front end when a person makes a call through inbound processing to our back end. There's the URL to our back end API. So it goes from the front end, which is basically your application talking to the API management. API management goes through some inbound processing, sends the request then to your back end. Your back end API application will do the processing and then respond. When it responds, the response data will come through outbound processing and then ultimately be sent back out of API management to your application. So it's a nice little loop here. So that means we can add policies at the inbound processing layer, at the backend layer, and at outbound processing. And these policies can be of many things. So let me click on Add Policies so you can see here. We can add policies to filter by APIs, by IPs. We can limit our rate calls. We can mock a response, which I'm going to show here in just a minute. We can do things like rewriting URLs, setting headers, doing cross-origin sharing, resource sharing settings, caching responses, all sorts of policies that we can go ahead and set there. So that way we can transform how this inbound and outbound data occurs. Now, for some of your APIs, you may not have any special policies that you're going to put in place. Others, you might want to. So just know that there's a bit that whole policy system is available, and you have this nice little loop here for being able to manage that. Okay. Now, if I go up here to test gives us a test harness to work with our APIs right here. So if I come to test and I say, let's go to Get Sessions. So when I click on Get Sessions under the test harness, you're going to see that it automatically brings in the different query parameters, and I can put values in there. It's also going to set HTTP headers. So whenever we call an API through API management, there's going to be some headers that we're going to want to pass. In particular, we absolutely have to pass in the subscription key. So that's basically say this application is connecting to the API, and oh, by the way, I was given this specific subscription key to connect to you by. We also have a couple other things that control caching and control tracing. So we can actually do individual request tracings when it comes in. Then down below, we have authorization. Because we're going to do a test call, we need to have a subscription key to do that. When we set up API management and we set up products, it's going to create us a primary and secondary key that we can use as an administrator for testing here. Developers will, of course, request their own keys through the developer portal and get those keys. Now, you will get two keys. You do get a primary key and you do get a secondary key. And the importance of this is that the primary key, of course, is probably what you're going to use initially. But if for some reason a developer believes that their key might have been compromised or somebody got a hold of it somehow or it leaked, what they could do is switch over to use the secondary key and then tell the API management by going through the developer portal, please regenerate my primary key. And then it will regenerate and give them a new key that they can use so they can feel secure. So if we go down a little bit further, there's the actual URL that we're going to make a request to. As you can see, there's the path that we gave it when we first created our API, imported our API, and that sessions is the name of the operation that we're going to do. And down here is going to show the HTTP request that's going to be sent. All I have to do to test this is just hit the send button. And within a moment here, we got our 200 requests back. So that's a successful call. It gives back the HTTP header information that gets sent back. And then down here is the JSON, which is the results of our API call. So we actually made a call to a backend API through our API management. So now that we've done this, we can feel confident that our API management is working correctly for these APIs, and we could go ahead and tell our developers that they could go out to the developer portal and start using these APIs. So let's take a quick look at the developer portal really quick. So I'm going to click on this developer portal, and the developer portal is completely customizable. So you can change the look and feel of it. You can change the theming, etc. As an administrator, you'll see this right here over on the side. You can change the styles and the templates. If you're not an administrator, you'll just see the site itself if you're just a developer. Now, this is where the developers can come in, and if they click on APIs, this is going to be their API catalog. And in this API catalog, we can see that we've got our demo conferences API. So if I click this, it's going to show me all of the different operations that are available for this API. And here's the documentation. So if I were to click on Get Sessions here, you'll see that we see API change history, because with API management, we can do revisions and versions of our APIs. And then we can also come down here and see how to make a request, what our expected results should be, and then sample code across multiple different languages on how to call this. So if I need to call this from Java, here is exactly the code that you need to make a request to this API through Java. Okay, so the developers then can come out here and request access to these specific APIs. And if they go into their profile, they will see their subscription keys for their different tiers that they were given access to. The developers can also go to analytics reports, where they can see additional information about their usage themselves, how they're using the APIs, and the performance and health of these APIs. This is the exact same data that you will see in the Azure portal as an administrator of API management. So there's one last thing I want to show you guys really quick before we wrap up. So there's this concept called mocking, and mocking is a way to be able to create an API endpoint for a developer before the actual backend service has been created. So this comes in handy when we are doing application development. We might not be completely ready with our backend. So what we might do is come up here and say we want to create a new API, and in this case, we're going to add a blank API. And what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and fill this out manually. So I'm going to just say this is a test call, and it gives us a name. And let's see, everything else I think we can leave fine there. Go ahead and hit create. And so now we've got a test call API. And what we need to do is we need to add an operation to this. And we will call, I'll just call this test. And we'll call this test here, just make it really simple. And then ultimately what we have to do is we have to give it a type of response that we're expecting. So we're going to go and do a 200 OK response. We're going to do a application JSON. There we go. As a response type. And then we're just going to do something like sample field and results. So a quick, just a JSON results. We'll go ahead and hit save. And so now we've defined a 200 level or 200 OK response coming back. So now what we want to do is set this up so this is mocking an example of a actual API call. So what I'm going to do is in this inbound processing, I'm going to say add policy, mock response, and I'm going to choose the 200 OK application response, hit save, and that's it. You see mocking is enabled. Now if a person comes out and tests this API, I hit a send request here. Oh, sorry, I forgot to put my subscription key in there. But if I had my subscription key in there, it would have come back with the actual sample that we put in there of JSON. So this gives us the ability to mock up a front end before we have any sort of back end created. So I know we kind of covered a lot in 30 minutes. I want to thank everybody for hopping in here and spending a little bit of time with us today to see a little bit more about API management. If you have any questions at all about API management, or you would like to learn a little bit more, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have, etc. Oops, I switched over to the wrong screen there. I apologize. So my email address is just mhacker@microsoft.com. So mhacker@microsoft.com. Feel free to email me with any questions that you might have, and I'll be more than happy to get back to you. Other than that, I would just like to thank everybody for spending a little bit of time with us today. Hopefully you learned a little something new, and I hope that you come back for future webcasts. So thank you and have a great day.